Hey guys, welcome back to Reserved Investments on YouTube. And I got a gem of a video for you guys today. Of course, if it's not a gem, you can let me know in the comment section below. So that way I know if it's worth my time and even creating these particular videos, especially at 1 o'clock in the morning when I'm extremely tired and exhausted. Well, with that being said, today we are going to talk about the different mindsets that make up individuals who are operating in the overall antiques and collectibles trade. Now, we're going to simplify this a little bit, okay? The four mindsets that we're going to be talking about today are that of the collector, that of the investor, that of the speculator, and that of the dealer. Now, to be fair, those of you that have advanced knowledge of the antiques and collectibles trade, you've probably heard certain terms like collector, investor, or even, believe it or not, speculator, dealer. These are other hybrid individuals that operate in the antiques and collectibles trade. I am going to be eventually doing a video on that as well. But to start off, to make sure that this video isn't an hour long and I can actually get some sleep today, we are just going to be talking about the primary characteristics and differences between that of a collector, an investor, a speculator, and a dealer. Now, before we go any further, please understand that this video is going to be composed of certain generalizations. And some of those generalizations may not be particularly flattering for some of you out there who may consider yourself a collector or an investor or a dealer or a speculator. I get that. All is what I'm trying to show you in this particular YouTube video is that when we look at Wall Street, when we look at the financial markets, if you have somebody that is investing in an S&P 500 index fund, or even somebody who's a dividend investor, or even somebody on Wall Street bets that is playing the options game, almost all of those particular groups of people, even though they have different short-term and or long-term objectives, their entire goal is to make money. That's why we invest in financial assets. Let's be realistic here. So when we compare the dynamics of the financial markets versus that of the antiques and collectibles trade, you need to understand that because there is an investment element, especially to the subject of collectible finance, which is what this channel deals with, obviously there are similarities and differences between Wall Street, the financial markets, and of course the antiques and collectibles trade. It is that direction that I want to get you guys thinking in, because a lot of you are going on a lot of collecting forums. You're continually communicating with people in the overall antiques and collectibles trade, and the one big unknown is you don't know if the person that you're talking to is an investor, is he a collector, is he a dealer, is he a speculator? And all these different individuals have different motives, both over the short term and over the long term. For instance, if you're going to communicate with me about the antiques and collectibles trade, it can be rare coins, it could be comic books, it could be video games, it could be toys, whatever it is. You need to understand that I'm considered a hybrid. I am a collector investor. So I have a passion, make no mistake, for a lot of these items that I collect, but at the end of the day, I'm much more rational. Either the price is there or it's not. This is why some of you guys will try to get me in a bidding war on a certain auction site, and you guys will notice I'll pull back because I'm not going to overpay for an item that I know I can most likely get it cheaper somewhere else. Now, in certain instances, I do surprise people, and I will overpay for an item if I think the market's on the up and up, and I think that particular item is going to keep going strong, at least over the near short term. I will pay a premium to get that item if I am either investing in it, speculating it, or in certain instances, just adding it to my collection because I want it. So this is very important. So what we're going to start with first are the characteristics that make up a collector and how they differ from that of an investor. Then we're going to look at the characteristics that make up a speculator and how they differ from that of a dealer. Now, there is a reason why this board is set up this way. Collectors, believe it or not, for the most part, tend to have a little bit of an overlap with investors. Now, a lot of you incorrectly assume that no, Shawn, a speculator would have more in common with an investor than that of a collector. That is actually patently false. In most cases, collectors tend to have more in common with investors, and speculators, believe it or not, tend to have more in common with dealers. Now, is there a such thing as an investor dealer? Is there a such thing as a collector speculator and vice versa? The answer is yes. I don't want to get too far down the rabbit hole. We can do that in a subsequent video, a follow-up if we need to. In this video, we're just going to be looking at the basic characteristics, differences, and also, of course, similarities. So with a collector, how many times have you heard me say this on this particular channel? A collector is born. They are not made. What I mean by that is you can talk about collectibles until you're blue in the face with a person that's just walking down the street. If that particular individual does not have the proverbial collecting gene, if they do not have a desire to collect anything, if they have no interest in these markets, it's going to do no good. You cannot make a collector out of someone. It either is there or it isn't. There's a lot of people, if you look at speculative bubbles, guys, and this is why I tell you guys to go back and study some of the most popular, some of the most famous speculative bubbles in either financial history or even the antiques and collectibles trade. If you study speculative bubbles, you're going to see there's a lot of people that end up coming into these markets thinking that, well, gee, this market I can make money in, therefore I'm a collector. When in all actuality, they're either a speculator or they're an investor, or maybe they're just a short-term dealer. They don't have the ability or the drive to become a long-term collector. Most people, research shows this, most people in the antiques and collectibles trade that are collectors and they're lifelong collectors, they picked it up in childhood. Somewhere in their childhood, they started to collect something and it took hold, even if they no longer collect that object. For instance, I work with a lot of people. As they get older, some of the people started maybe collecting comic books or baseball cards or even rocks, even seashells. And as they get older, they have no interest in those collecting categories anymore. So they move on to something else. They have the collector gene, but it started in childhood. That's why now that they're in their 40s, 50s, 60s, they're still actively collecting for that reason. It is a lifelong drive. They're driven to do that. It is something innate inside them. It is not something that happens to them externally. Like we saw during the financial crisis with American Pickers, Storage Wars, Pawn Stars. There were people sitting at home, 2010, watching a lot of these shows, and they would go out to the flea market, they would go out to the garage sale, and they would start a collection. It didn't last because it wasn't innate. It was something that they saw on TV and said, wow, that interests me. I want to become a collector. Not realizing collectors are born. They are not made. Continuing, collectors are also more emotional and more irrational than that of, if we were to compare them to investors, dealers, even in certain instances, speculators. Now, to be fair, that's not necessarily a bad thing. And again, I said there's going to be generalizations in this video. I don't want anybody getting mad at me here because I consider also myself a collector. But you need to understand that what a collector does best is they make order out of chaos. And if you don't believe me, log online to any collecting forum where people are happy to show you pictures of their collections. You're going to see action figure collectors that have like rooms of action figures, all cataloged, all in unique rows, all organized, all sorted. Collectors are very good at making order out of chaos. Another thing that defines collectors is that they are not always profit motivated. Most people that collect this stuff, I hate to say this, there's a lot of people that go on collecting forums and they convince themselves that everything that they are buying for their collections is a quote-unquote investment simply because they have an emotional attachment to it. So they log on to Lego.com or they log on to their favorite comic book dealer site and they just click the buy now. They'll spend $2,000 on an item. Then when they get it, they'll try to justify the fact in their mind that it's an investment. Now, this is not how investors operate. This is how collectors operate. And this is why a lot of collectors, I hate to say this, get themselves into trouble when they come into these particular markets. Now, collectors, to their credit, most of them are extremely knowledgeable. Most of them also enjoy spending time with their collections. They enjoy cataloging their collections. They enjoy doing price research. They enjoy spending a lot of time understanding what they're collecting, understanding the markets that they serve, interacting with other collectors. There's nothing wrong with that. Remember, I've said this before. As long as it's not impacting your financial life, your personal life, your health, your social life, you're not doing anything wrong. It's just, I think that in certain instances, collectors can get a little bit overboard with all the stuff that they engage in regards to building and maintaining their collections. In certain instances, I will even advise some collectors to pull back a little bit and just let things lay the way they are. You don't need to own everything. I assure you, it's not going to end up being out of your reach if you don't choose to buy something. Most of the items that collectors are going after are not usually, in most cases, investment grade. And we're going to get to that next, because now we're going to talk about the investor. Now, the one thing you need to understand when we talk about investors is either the price is there or it's not. For instance, when I go bidding on rare coins, when I go bidding on pieces of currency, when I go bidding on comic books, you got to understand that it would be nearly impossible for the average person that's watching this video to bid somebody like me up, because either the price is there or it isn't. When I log on Heritage Auctions, if I'm looking at a rare piece of currency and I'm willing to pay $5,000 for it, and somebody comes along and jumps the bid to $5,500, guess what? I'm out. I'm done. I analyzed that market and I said that piece is worth $5,000. I am willing to pay $5,000 to take that piece home with me, or I should say, to have Heritage send it to me in a fancy little envelope. Now, if that bid goes up, somebody outbids me, I'm willing to walk away. I'm an investor. Now, when we talk about investing, the barrier to entry is usually higher than that of a collector, that of a speculator, and usually it's on par, believe it or not, with a dealer. Now, why is this? Because you know what the definition of investment grade is? When we look at items in the antiques and collectibles trade, investment grade is defined as the top 10 to 15% of items in a certain market. So if I want to buy, I'm just going to use this as an example, a copy of Batman 189. If I want to go after that particular issue, I'll let you guys look up what's key about that particular issue. But let's say I want to go after a copy of Batman 189 or Batman 232. I'm probably going to want to go after a 9.4 or a 9.6 condition of that particular item or higher, because that is in the top 10 to 15% of that market. So if a 9.2 comes up for bid, I'm probably going to say, you know what, that's not investment grade. I'm an investor. I'm going to pass on it. Now, to be fair, if I can get that particular 9.2 under market value, yeah, of course, I'd be an idiot to pass on it. But overall, if that 9.2 is going to sell at full market value, there's no point, if I consider myself an investor and I'm going after the top 10 or 15% of that market, for me to spend the time bidding on it, because I'm more going to be interested in a 9.4 or a 9.6. This is why the barrier to entry is high. I am usually spending thousands of dollars on up for each particular piece that I acquire as an investor, and even, I hate to say this, guys, in certain instances, as a collector. Now, most investors, obviously, are profit motivated. We may also be a collector, but make no mistake, the profit motivation is first and forefront. So that's why if I go on a Heritage auction site and I'm looking at a piece of currency and I evaluate it at $5,000, I'm willing to only pay $5,000. Timmy comes along, bids me up to $5,500, I'm out. Little Timmy can have it. In my assessment, it's only worth $5,000. It's all I'm willing to pay. I will walk away 99.9% of the time as a result. Now, most investors are usually very well educated in business and finance. Usually, in order to have the money to play in these markets, especially on the investor side of the equation, most people are also successful in some other facet of their life, whether it's their professional life, whether it's business, whether it's they know how to make money in the investment side of financial, Wall Street, whatever it is. They usually already have a pool of money. They're already somewhat sophisticated and understand these risks and how the markets work. Another thing that makes an investor different from that of a collector, most investors have a written plan. How many times in a lot of my earlier videos do I tell you guys, if you're going to invest in the antiques and collectibles trade and you're looking to make a profit in these markets, whether it's over the short term or over the long term, you need to have a written plan. You also need to know your markets. Now, this is where there's a little bit of a crossover. The collector also knows his or her markets in these particular categories, whether it's comic books, video games, toys, whatever it is that they're collecting or investing in. Both collectors and investors need to know their proverbial markets. And I would venture to say that a lot of collectors really know the markets, even better than investors in certain cases, because one thing that collectors will do that investors won't do, collectors will spend a lot of time on collecting forums, interacting with other collectors, going on Facebook groups, going to conventions, and the like. There's a lot of investors, like myself, that spend a lot of money in a lot of these markets, but we don't have time. We don't always go to conventions. We're not worried about interacting with other participants in the overall market, unless if it's talking to either a grading company, an auction company, maybe certain dealers, but we're really not spending a lot of our time talking to collectors on a one-on-one basis. Now, another thing that separates an investor from that of a collector is that we generally have a longer term focus. Now, this is something where we are similar to that of a collector. A lot of you guys tell me, Shawn, you don't understand. I'm a hardcore collector. It goes into my collection and it never comes out. Now, me personally, I think that's completely ridiculous. I think if you are of that mindset, you're more of a hoarder than that of a collector. Notice, hoarder didn't make my 4 mindsets because that's a mental disorder in my opinion. That's really not a proper mindset to have in the overall antiques and collectibles trade. But what I will tell you is, I honestly try to break collectors out of that mindset. Because just because you bought something and it served a purpose or a need right now doesn't mean it's still going to serve that purpose and need going forward. You got to understand that the only constant in the antiques and collectibles trade is change. And that also means that you yourself as a collector will also change in how you view the markets. And as a result from that change in mindset, you may decide, hey, you know, I bought this rare video game. Back when I bought it, I really had an emotional attachment to it. It actually served a purpose. Now it's time to let it go. It's time to let somebody else own it. I can take that money. I can go after another item that I'm looking for. Or hell, I can invest the item in something else. That is the proper mindset to have when you look at these markets. And I don't care what mindset you adopt or identify with. You really need to have the idea that at any given time, you may decide to let something go, or it may be a good time to sell something. That is something that both collectors and investors can relate to. There is an overlap there. One thing, though, about investors, and I got to repeat this, we know the time value of money. We understand opportunity costs. If you're new to this particular YouTube channel, and you go back and you watch some of my earlier videos, where I talk about the time value of money, where I talk about opportunity cost, and you're enlightened, it really appeals to you, it's almost like a light bulb went off in your head, it's because you never analyzed the antiques and collectibles trade from that standpoint before. And you really have to be successful in these markets. Now, let's talk about speculators. Speculators are usually short-term focused. There is nothing wrong with that. If you dabble in Funko Pops, if you dabble in modern era Pokemon cards, if you dabble in modern era collectible card games, Magic the Gathering, I already mentioned Pokemon, Yu-Gi-Oh!, if you dabble in even modern era video games, like limited run games, certain items of that nature, you want to be short-term focused because your goal should be to take that particular item, profit off of it as soon as possible, and flip it onto the secondary market and rinse and repeat. So you're constantly flipping items on an ongoing basis on the secondary market, and you're stripping out the profit margin. That is the goal of a speculator. They are constantly taking money and rotating it in the antiques and collectibles trade, usually in mass-produced collecting categories. Most speculators find that modern era mass-produced collectibles are extremely profitable over the short term. And that's what I teach on this channel. A lot of you guys hate me. I do talk a little bit about dreaded reselling, also known as scalping, on this particular channel. And a lot of you guys send me hate mail. I'm sorry. That all plays into the speculator mindset. Those of you right now that are flipping PlayStation 5s on the secondary market for a profit, you have the speculator mindset. You're not an investor. You're really not a dealer. You're a speculator. Now let's talk more about the speculator mindset. Well, I hate to say this, but sometimes speculators lack advanced understanding of finance. They lack advanced understanding of opportunity costs. And that's not an insult. They can learn that. But you got to understand, the barrier to entry to become a speculator is very low compared to the barrier to entry to become an investor. So naturally, when Beanie Babies were a thing, or Pogs, or Holiday Barbie, to use that as an example, there were a lot of speculators that got involved in that market because they could go to Toys R Us. Remember that store? Great store. Those of you that remember that store, you could take $100, go to Toys R Us, and you could call yourself a speculator. Where if you entered the antiques and collectibles trade with $100 and called yourself an investor, someone like me might look at you a little bit suspiciously. I hate to say that, but usually usually investors are spending thousands of dollars, not hundreds of dollars, to put that in paradigm so that you guys understand how this works. Now going forward, again, we're usually looking at the bottom rung of the reseller ladder when we talk about speculators, and that is not an insult. We all have to start somewhere. Even to this day, in the year 2022, I do speculate on certain items. That doesn't mean I'm unsophisticated. That doesn't mean I lack advanced understanding of finance, because I'm also an investor. But sometimes there's certain markets where the profit margins or the easy money is just too easy to pass up, to the point where you say, you know what, I'll take a couple $100, couple of $1,000, I'll throw it at that market. I will click flip those particular items in the secondary market. I'll take my money out and then I'll move it. I'll put it in something else. That's all the speculative mindset. Now, we got to talk about being a dealer. Last but not least, you need to understand that a dealer needs to be focused and driven. A dealer cannot be successful and also be a collector, because he will never let anything go. He will not let anything go. He has to be business-minded, not object-focused. This is why when we look at prices for comic books over the last few years, I remember I had a very interesting interaction with a dealer and with several other individuals. I was at a convention. I'm not going to state the name. I'm not going to state the name of the dealer. And the dealer was talking about how he came across a certain Bronze Age collection of comic books. And in that collection was a high-grade copy of Incredible Hulk 181, Amazing Spider-Man 129, Giant-Size X-Men 1, House of Secrets 92, all these mega keys. And he sold the collection for a 20% profit margin. He was very happy because it sold within a week. And somebody asked him, who was standing there, we were all in a group talking, and somebody asked him, well, gee, if you would have kept those comic books till today in 2022, you see how much money you would have had? Well, you got to understand, a dealer needs to rotate inventory. He's not trying to invest in his inventory long term. Now, there are exceptions to this. If the dealer is financially established, he's financially successful, and he has an inventory worth millions, maybe he also is a personal collector, he may choose to pull some items out and hold them in what is known as a rainy day fund. And what that means is, I analyze the market for this particular item. I look at it. I think it's undervalued. So I'm going to put this rare coin. I'm going to put this Incredible Hulk 181. I'm going to put this item away. And because I have the means and money to do so, I can afford to pull it out of my inventory and hold it for X number of months, X number of years, until I think the market catches up to what I think it's worth. That's why dealers tend to understand the market better than anyone else, believe it or not. They're on par with investors in this regard. They're on par with collectors in this regard. They are more advanced than speculators in this regard. You have to be, because in most cases, being a dealer requires more capital than that of a speculator. In some cases, it even requires more capital than that of an investor, because if you log on to any of your top tier coin dealers, if you log on to any of your top tier comic book dealers, you're going to see the value of their inventory, especially if they cater to investors like me. They're catering to the 10-15% top of the market. You got to remember, one of those comic books that they just have listed, just one of them, can be worth $20, $30, $40, $50,000. Same thing with rare coins. It's not uncommon. I can drop names of rare coin dealers where you log on and the cheapest coin they have on site is $3,000 all the way up to $250,000 because they cater specifically to higher end investors and collectors. Now, what does this mean? Well, for a dealer, he has to keep his inventory moving constantly. So he is more on par with that of a speculator than that of an investor. An investor is going to buy, hold, usually for mid to long-term range in a lot of the items that he's going after, okay? A dealer needs to rotate that stock. Same thing with a speculator. This is why if you talk to any rare coin dealers, and I always, now that we're 26 minutes into this video, I can tell this. I always tell people who get into rare coins, spend time talking with an honest dealer. An honest dealer is going to tell you, hey, I'll sell you that coin for $5,400, but just know I paid $5,000 for it. And a lot of people scratch their head and say, well, you paid $5,000 for it and you're willing to sell it for $5,400. Why are your margins so tight? Well, when you look at the rare coin marketplace, that's how that industry operates. Most rare coin dealers only make a couple of percent for each item that they have in inventory, but they churn it so quickly. For instance, I have banknotes. If you go back to the video on large size currency that I did, there were certain notes that I put in that video that I showed you guys that literally I paid $4,100, $4,200 for those banknotes. The dealer, I know, he paid $3,800 for them. So on my $4,200 purchase, he only made $400. But he was happy because he knows I'm a legit guy. When I pay for something, obviously the credit card's not going to bounce or be fraudulent. The check's not going to bounce. So he's willing to work on those low numbers if it means dealing with people like me that he can trust, where he can quick churn and burn his inventory. And there's a lot of dealers that would like to work with people if you are of that mindset. That's why investors get good deals if they work with dealers over the long term. That's why I tell you guys, those of you that collect comic books, those of you that collect any established or mature collecting market, work with a dealer or an auction house, get to know them, and good things will sometimes come your way. You will get deals. You will find excellent buys that you yourself can profit from if you choose to do so. Now, one final point here. Again, a dealer must focus on trends, and you need to realize, I got to reiterate this before we finish this video, a collector mindset is detrimental to a dealer. If a dealer starts thinking like a collector and starts to position his inventory like that of a collector, he could potentially get into trouble. Did you ever watch, and this is cliche, you ever see, I think the movie was Funny Farm with Chevy Chase? Well, the antique dealer in that town never wants to sell anything. So people come in her shop and she goes, oh, that was my my ex-husband, he died. It was something that really belonged to his family. I have an emotional attachment to that. I'm not going to sell that. That is an example, if you watch that movie, of somebody who is a dealer who should not be a dealer, because in all actuality, they have the collectible mindset. Now, if you enjoyed this video, please let me know. I know I usually try to keep these videos at 20 minutes. Today I went almost 30. I did get off on a rant on a little bit, some of these talking points. Let me know what you think in the comment section below. Thank you. Have a great night. I am now off to bed, guys.